Afternoon, good evening, lovely viewers, lovely listeners. Once again, you are welcome to MacD Literature Made Simple, where I've been trying to help you understand literature and make it lively and more simpler for you. So we have gone through a lot of basics about what literature should be about or what literature is, and currently or in our current series, we have been looking at survey of English literature, how literature became the literature that we are all looking at today, how literature became so known and so powerful in England, how it became a subject of study, how it became so powerful. And we look at the first period. In our last lesson, I took you through the Renaissance period. I gave you an overview of what the Renaissance period is all about. I tried to make you understand some of the factors that promoted it, and I think one of the main factors or two of the main factors that I mentioned were humanism, shifting attention from the church and placing it on man. Then I also look at the inventions and discoveries, discovery of the new world known today as America, invention of the movable block printing, which make writings more accessible to people. Now today, I promise you'll be looking at the forms of prose that were predominant during that time, and you cannot talk about forms of prose without mentioning prose, poetry, and drama. Once you talk about the forms of prose, basically you are going to talk about three forms: the prosaic form, the poetic form, and the dramatic form. And that's what I want to delve into today. So these are our learning objectives. First, I want to help you understand the main forms of prose, the main forms of literature, the main forms of literature during the Renaissance period. Then I'll also help you to identify some key writers and their writings. So like I've always mentioned, and I'll always mention it throughout this survey, when every period is influenced by certain writers. And today you know about some of these writers and some of the things they wrote. I'm using things because they wrote different things or different writings, or they wrote under different genres. So we'll look at that. We'll explore some styles of writing where you hear about the Senecan style, you hear about the Caesarean style or Ciceronian style of writing. Then we'll discuss how these styles influence the three genres. So let's start. It started from the 15th century to the early 17th century. So basically, don't be surprised if you hear certain writers of the Renaissance period appearing again in the 18th century writers that we'll be looking at next, or that'll be our next period to look at. Don't be surprised because the periods interlock. The ending part of the Renaissance is the beginning part of the 18th century writing. Then it was marked by revival of classical learning and value. I told you the last time they took interest in classical writings, and it has strong influence on Greek and Roman texts. Once they took interest in classical writings, expect Greek and Roman texts or mythologies to influence them. Then basically our class today is based on the last part of the introduction. Literature was divided into prose, poetry, and drama. Now let's pick them one after the other. First thing to talk about is prose. What are the main features of Renaissance prose? One, it adopted two main prose styles or two main styles of writing: Ciceronian writing and the Senecan writing. Ciceronian writing, which people also refer to as Caesarean writing, is a form of writing that adopts complex sentences. The whole style of writing is complex. It includes a lot of dependent clauses. You could have one independent clause, but the dependent clauses are so much, so that could be a complex statement. Then it has a lot of rounded periods. We also had the Senecan writing, which is jumpier, which is livelier, and which adopts shorter sentences. So there's so much contrast between these two styles of prose writing. And basically, I think if you want to write about serious subject, if you want to write for the academic world, you write using the Ciceronian or the Caesarean style. If you want to write drama, if you want to write jokes, if you want to write comedy, you use the Senecan style, which is shorter, jumpier, and livelier. Now, prose fiction was not so common. It was real. Being real doesn't mean it never existed, but it was not so common. But rather, the prose form took different forms that I'll look at in the next slide. The common forms are, they wrote about treatise, and treatise, I'll look at it, sermons and translations. So I'll tell you one after the other. So Thomas More's The Unfortunate Traveler is an example of a prosaic writing during this period, and that's a good example for you to look at. Now, in the next slide, we are going to look at treatise, which was a form of prosaic writings during the Renaissance period. Now, treatise are formal writing that explores specific subjects. It is a kind of investigative writing. It is also a kind of writing that critiques negativity, critiques evil in society, and also try to compare a particular incident of societal happenings to another, to get the contrast, to get the differences. So we look at an example is Thomas More's political Utopia, which is a political treaty where Thomas More or More tried to compare a rational and ideal state, nation, to the nation or Europe of his time. So you realize that he's trying to find a contrast, the difference between what a rational state should be, utopianism, rationality, what an ideal state to be, and what Europe of his time was. So you can have political treaties like Utopia, you can have religious treaties, any treaty on any subject. Once it's a form of formal writing and it's kind of investigative in nature, you can look at that. Now, translations. Translations were so common during the Renaissance period, and two main forms of translations were predominant: the secular translations and then the religious translations. But the secular translations did not see much light. You can see Sir Thomas Eliot, we have Pluto, we have Socrates or Socrates. They all did secular translations. Secular translation simply means translations about worldly writing, writings that are not religious. You translate that, we call it secular translations. Then directly opposite to the secular translations are the religious translations, which involve translation of religious texts. And here we have quite a number of translations. John Wycliffe gave us the first biblical translation. He translated the Bible for the first time in history into English. He did that translation. Then William Tyndale, he also translated the Bible. But ironically, Tyndale's translation was classified as too radical and therefore was forbidden to be read and was banned. And if you want to do critical analysis of this, it brings a lot of questions up, which I'm not here to challenge religion. I'm a Christian myself, or I'm a religious person myself. I'm not here to critique religion. I wasn't there. I don't know much about that. But as a teacher of literature in English and as a lover of literature, I want to pop some questions up. But before the questions, I want to ask this. What is a translation? Basically, I think translation simply means trying to say something that was said in a language in a different language. And you have to try as much as you can to present the facts as they appear in the original statement in the original language. That's translation. Now, if my definition, this is not academic or scholarly definition of translation, but if this definition is in place, then the question is, does it mean that Tyndale didn't do proper translation? Does it mean he didn't present the facts as they appear in the original language of the Bible that he translated into English? Does it mean that, or it means that he did the right translation? He translated perfectly the facts as they were in the original version, in the original language. I'm using these two originals because we still have the Bible in the original language, but as to whether that is the original version again is also questionable because it could have been rewritten. So I'm looking at translation of the original writings of the Holy Bible in the original language into English by Tyndale, which was seen as too radical. Could it also be that this translation, if let out, will reveal a lot of secrets about the religion, and therefore the reverence given to it will not be? Because don't forget that this is a time where some people were promoting humanism, shift attention from the church, place attention on man, give man the freedom to reason, to think, to do things his way, give man the ideology or the perception to understand that God cannot do everything for you? These are a lot of questions that I've asked. Try to answer them on your own and try to get a conclusion. I'm not here to draw conclusions on anything. But after Tyndale's or Williams translation, we had another translation that was done under the authority of King James I, which was accepted as the acceptable translation, the official translation, which has been used, read, or it has been approved, and we still use it today. So we realize that translations were very popular during that time, and if Renaissance prose will be known for one thing, that could be biblical or religious translation, as it was done in 1611 under King James the first leadership. Now let's now look at prose. So the sermons are also preachings that were done, and they were also done in English or translations of them. Now let's look at Renaissance prose, poetry. I love poetry a lot. I think poems are so easy to understand. I think poems are relatable if you could comprehend them. And I think poems are for lazy readers, because within a short period of time you could read a lot of poems. I am not in any way establishing that all poems are short, because I know we have poems that are very long, like stories that you could read. We have Paradise Lost and Paradise Regained, which is a very long poem that I'll be talking about. But poetry also flourished during the Renaissance period. It was mainly influenced by Italian and French poetry. So what you have to understand is that during this period, English is still developing to become an acceptable world language. And therefore, and the English too were once under the authority of the French and the Italians. So don't be surprised they were influenced by these people. Major poets that you can talk about, we have Edmund Spenser, Philip Sidney, we have William Shakespeare, Ben Jonson. But one thing that I want to talk about beforehand, so is here, is that we have cycles. So you could hear Spenser cycle. So if you hear Spenser cycle, we are talking about a group of writers that wrote during that time. So Edmund Spenser has a cycle, and we have the Fairy Queen, we have Epithalamium. Epithalamium, if it's a fairy queen, don't pay too much attention to the spelling. I mentioned before that English has developed a lot. It has undergone a lot of growth, a lot of modernization, a lot of modification, if I could put it that way. But I want to explain epithalamium. I love epithalamiums. Epithalamiums are poems that are written to celebrate marriage. So it's a type of poem, epithalamium or mion. They are poems that are written to celebrate marriage. So if you are getting married on your marriage ceremony day, you decide to write a lovely romantic poem to celebrate your wife or your husband, is qualified, or it could be described as epithalamium. Thank you. Then we have the Philip Sidney cycle, where they also wrote the Astrophel and Stella, Defense of Poesy. Some of these poems, what I'll be doing for you is that I'll find time and read them and discuss some of them with you. Sir Walter Raleigh also wrote The Lie, The Pilgrimage. So we have the Edmund Spenser or the Spenser cycle, Sidney cycle. We also have the Shakespeare and John Benson cycle. And that time too, we have quite a number of writers. So one thing that you should be aware of is that I have on my slide here, Shakespeare wrote over 100 sonnets. I want to be specific, and I stand to be corrected, but per my investigations, Shakespeare actually wrote 154 sonnets. 154 sonnets. Now, cast your mind back. I explain what sonnets are. If you don't remember, look for that video and try to understand it. So, writing 154 sonnets with the same rhyme scheme, A, B, A, B, C, D, C, D, E, F, E, F, G, G, trust me, it's not an easy feat to achieve. And most of the themes that they wrote about were love, time, and mortality, living forever or dying. Then Benson also wrote songs to Celia, On the First Sun, and the rest. Now, let's look at John Milton, who also wrote quite a number. But what made John Milton a very popular poet is his poem or poems Paradise Lost and Paradise Regained. Then we have metaphysical poems that were written. Now, these writers mainly wrote metaphysical poems. When we say metaphysical, what do we mean? We are looking at meta means beyond physical. So beyond the physical. Poems that are intuitive. Poems that are not about what you see so easily understood. They are poems that challenge your intuition. But I want to give you a scholarly definition of what metaphysical poems are. So when we talk about metaphysical poems, we are talking about type of poems that uses or includes elaborate similes and metaphors, extended poetic concepts and paradoxes. It uses colloquial speech and an interest in exploring the interplay between the physical and the spiritual world. This is the key thing between the physical and the spiritual world. So metaphysical poems are beyond intuition. They are not poems about the physical. And we have quite a number of examples on the screen for you. Now let's look at the last type of writings, drama. So every era, no matter how insignificant a type or a form of literature is, all the three are almost always represented. So dramas that were reduced, they were inspired by Greek and Roman classics, which you're already aware of. Now, they never had much theaters during this time. So most of their plays or drama were performed in schools, inns of court, and public theater. And they wrote tragedies, a type of drama that ends on sad notes. Comedies ends on happy notes. Tragic comedy starts on a sad note and ends on a sad note. Major playwrights. Once you hear playwright, you're talking about dramatists, people who write drama. We have Thomas Kite, The Spanish Tragedy, Christopher Marlowe, Dr. Faustus, William Shakespeare, Hamlet, Othello, As You Like It. A lot. Shakespeare actually wrote a lot. And if you want, I could dedicate a whole lesson to William Shakespeare alone, and I could mention some of the drama that he wrote. A lot of drama he wrote. uh, we have historical drama. He wrote different kinds of drama that you can talk about or that you can think of, and most of these things were like performed. So if you want, a few of them could be read to you now or could be mentioned to you now. So he wrote plays, Richard series, Henry series. Then we have the Merry Wives of Windsor, As You Like It, The 12th Night, Measure for Measure, Midsummer Night's Dreams, one of my favorite, Macbeth, a lot of you have read that or might have read that, Othello, King Lear, Antony and Cleopatra, a very common one. Then Hamlet, and don't forget Romeo and Juliet. It's a very common one as well. So Shakespeare's contemporaries, those some of the people that wrote with Shakespeare, we have Ben Jonson, we have Ben Webster, and some of their writings are also there. So in summary, we are looking at Renaissance period and the kind of literature they wrote. Prose were mainly about treatises, which were formal writings and translation. Poems, we have cycles of them. We have the Spenser cycle, we have the Shakespeare cycle. They also wrote about the metaphysical poems or poets. Then drama, we have Shakespeare, we have his contemporaries. So today, this is all that I have for you about this. In our next lesson, we may still be about the Renaissance period and possibly pick one play or one poem that was written during this time and discuss it. Anyone, I've not decided yet. If you can suggest on under the comment, that will also help. Have a nice day. Goodbye.